while I had always been public about it in one-to-one conversations, I never posted out onto a platform where 60,000 people could see it. My sobriety and my years that I've been sober and my story, right? And so I was nervous putting that out there, even though I knew that it was necessary for my own authenticity and my own commitment to living a life of service, that I felt very much called that I had to do this. This was necessary to do this. And we said as we started this out, like, if we help just one person, this is worth it.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That is Marin Nelson. She's a regional VP of Enterprise Service at Salesforce, and she's the co-founder and CEO of SoberForce. Now, this is the second of our conversations during this month, May 2021, about mental health challenges within the sales community. That's all part of an effort during this month of Mental Health Awareness Month to highlight this growing problem and to bring the discussion and support out into the open. So in our conversation today, Marin shares her story of recovery and talks about the path that led her and several other executives at Salesforce to create SoberForce. Now, SoberForce is an employee-led resource group within Salesforce that was started to provide community and connection for sober employees and support people with addiction issues, and importantly, to destigmatize addiction in the workplace. As Marin shares, they are raising awareness, they're being open about sharing their own recovery stories, and working to create an environment that encourages others to speak up in seeking help. Now, personally, I think this is a model that other companies can follow. You don't have to be a mega corporation to create this type of community to support your employees. So we're going to get into all of this and much, much more. But before we get to Marin, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could also give us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it. Marin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you.
Well, thank you for joining us. This is part of one of our conversations we're going to be doing during Mental Health Awareness Month, but hopefully people listen to it beyond that. But before we jump into talking about that, tell us a little bit about your background, your job, what do you currently do?
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, first of all, and thanks for focusing on mental health, because that is a critical topic now more than ever, I'd say, after surviving, continue to survive a year of pandemic.
A pandemic.
Starting to see.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some statistics that somebody shared with me yesterday. A group is doing some research on this, and it was just saying that they had 750 responses so far from sellers, I think primarily in tech space, but 75% report currently, and this is data that's just a few weeks old, overall stress levels is feeling stressed or highly stressed.
Yeah.
And 58% came back and said, rated their overall mental health as fair or poor. And interesting article in the New York Times today from Adam Grant saying that, you know, when people talk about this fair, he talked about this condition they call languishing, right?
Yes,
it's not
I
depression.
saw that. Everyone's talking about this article. I think everyone's been seen by this article.
Yeah, but it's like,
thank you.
Yeah, that's I never heard it put that way before, but
and how could you not, right? The stress, the people who have young kids at home doing school from home. We've got 4 kids. Anyways, I will answer your question. I have not forgotten you asked who am I, and I will answer that. But anyways,
that's okay.
Thank you for having this focus, because it is critical. And yes, to your point, mental health is struggling across the board. Addictions on the rise. Deaths from opioid overdose on the rise in scary numbers with this pandemic. So it's really important that we have these conversations. So I'm Marin Nelson. I'm Regional Vice President for Enterprise Service Cloud at Salesforce and have been there for 4 years. Before that was at different startups in the healthcare software as a service space. So my whole career, 15 years, has been in this space. And yeah, that's who I am on the work front.
Right. Well, so 4 kids. So
Yeah.
you've had your struggles this last year. I mean, are they all school age or not? Or
I
what's
am
the
very
distribution?
lucky. So I'm married to an amazing partner, my husband Darren, who is a full-time stay-at-home parent. So that is like an immediate
Okay.
differentiator between me and a lot of my colleagues who are dual working families, which is a vastly different experience. So not to say that it hasn't had its struggles, but it
Well, I'm
makes it a
sure.
lot easier when we have the capacity for one parent to be on point full time in a safe way,
Yeah.
right? We haven't had to have outside help and
Right.
introduce risk in that way. I have two stepsons
Right.
who are 16 and 13, so they are, they did really well. Like they are self sufficient. They're doing the deal on their own. They don't need the help with the homework and all of that. I think the hardest hit group, and then my younger two are our 4-year-old twins who are not yet in school. So
Right.
we were lucky in that regard. My friends who had kids who were elementary age, like, second, third, fourth grade, that's incredible. You were a teacher. Like someone had to become the
Yeah.
teacher at home. So I have a lot of compassion for my colleagues who are in that space because I don't really know how they did it. It's a lot.
Yeah. Well, I interviewed, a woman named Tiffany Hempel from LinkedIn on the show a few weeks ago. And yeah, she'd caught my attention because something she'd written is that she has, during the pandemic, she identified like 16 different jobs she had,
Yeah.
only one of which was her real job.
Correct. Yeah.
So yeah, I so much admiration for people with kids of school age that have had to go through this. It's even preschoolers.
Luckily, they're starting to go back. Luckily, for all of the kids' well-being, that's been the hardest part is just isolation, social isolation, and so getting back to school matters. And luckily, we can do it now in what feels like a safe way. So I'm ready for that.
Good.
We're all ready for that. Everyone
we're ready.
is ready for that.
Yeah, I mean, my wife and I are both fully vaccinated, and we're sort of tiptoeing out into being.
Yep.
Last week was the first time we went to a restaurant, and
isn't it so weird?
Took our masks off, and it was like it
are
was
we doing
exceedingly
this?
weird.
Are we taking our mask off? Okay.
Weird.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
We're all going to have just weird social anxieties that we have to unlearn. I don't know.
Well, unlearn is right.
How fast can we get back to whatever normal is without being afraid?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about something else that you do, though, because you're also
thank you,
president of an organization.
I am
within your employer, within Salesforce, and so tell us about that.
Yes, thank you. So I am also president of SoberForce, which is a new affinity group we started in November at Salesforce. And SoberForce, we created it with other sales. So there are 3 other sales leaders in recovery. So I'm celebrating 16 years of sobriety on May 8th.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. It's hard to believe I'm old enough to have 16 years of sobriety.
Well, do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
No, not at all. I'm happy to share. So I got sober at 24 in New York City. I was living in Brooklyn at the time. It's a great place to get sober. Great place to bottom out. Great place to get sober.
Was it alcohol or?
Yes, alcohol. So, nothing big and dramatic. Really, there's an expression. I'm a part of a 12-step group, and that's always been my foundation of sobriety. And it's sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that was my experience. Just come from a line of alcoholism in my family. I'm very lucky that I also have a lot of examples of long-term sobriety in my family. And so I had the example from the earliest memories of what a sober life looked like and what an active alcoholic life looked like in my family, my extended family. My dad has a lot of years of long-term recovery. I got to think now, 33 years of sobriety. So I had an example right in my house, right, of what a sober life looked like and someone active in their sobriety. And I suspected I had a problem right out of the gate. I mean, I started drinking at 14, and I remember thinking at that young of an age, like, I don't think I'm thinking about this in the way that other people do, but I'm not going to say anything, right? So.
And you grew up in the Minneapolis area?
I did. I grew up in the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
Yep. And went to school at Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison.
My hometown. Yay.
Yeah, go Badgers.
Go Badgers, yes.
Both my parents are from there, as we covered, so we'll have to make that connection later. Get out the high school yearbooks and see if your brother and my parents were, in fact, in class together.
Probably
So
then, so,
yeah,
yes.
so there's a quiz. A Hazelden has a quiz online that's about, do you have a drinking problem? Or at least they did. I'm sure they still do. And I took
Sure.
it. I remember taking it when I was 18 and acing that quiz. It was like, you drink more than 99.9% of the female population. It was the only score I think I got that high my freshman year of college. And I remember thinking, yeah, well, I go to a Big Ten school and I'm in a sorority and whatever. I'm fine. But it stuck with
Right.
me. It planted a seed, a very necessary seed. And I was really lucky that I had that moment, what is, often referred to as a moment of grace, that I had that awareness on May 8th of 2005 to think,
Wow.
I have a problem and I need help. And I called my parents, and it still gives me goosebumps because that moment could have been really fleeting, right? And I'm just incredibly blessed that I called in that moment and said I need help.
Did you go home?
I didn't. No, I did 12-step program every day, went to a meeting every day, put myself in the middle of the pack, and I've been really lucky that I have not found it necessary to drink since I walked into those rooms.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. So SoberForce.
Yeah, so let's get back to SoberForce. So I appreciate you sharing that. But so what was the impetus for you you said there are 4 sales leaders in Salesforce, within Salesforce.
Yes.
Was one of them Chris Anthony?
Yes. So Chris Anthony.
Who's been on this program, a friend of the show.
Yes.
Right.
I listened to that interview. That was great. So Chris and I didn't know each other. What's so great about this is none of us actually knew each other as sales leaders because we all are in different groups. Sure. And so Chris posted on LinkedIn about his sobriety. He went public with his sobriety last year. So we have the same amount of time. He was celebrating 15 years last year. And that got connected to another co-founder, Randy Ramirsma, who's a AVP of MuleSoft at Salesforce. And I connected to Randy because Randy had posted about his celebrating sobriety. And then that brought in another leader, Andrew Kostenbader, who's an AVP in enterprise sales. And so the 4 of us were like, well, we should get on a phone call and chat. I mean, it'd be so great to just connect with you guys. So we started talking weekly. We had just a 30-minute call. And really quickly, we're like, you know what? These are hard times. This was last fall, so fall of 2020. Sure. We're like, these are hard times. People are really struggling. People are relapsing.
Right.
And I'm sure there are people struggling amongst us. I mean, there's statistics out there that say 12.7%, I think is a stat I had seen recently, of people suffer with an addiction, struggle with addiction, or or are in recovery, right?
Right.
I'm probably butchering that stat, so you'll want to check that. But I'll find it and send it to you. But basically saying there are a lot of people, there are a lot of us out there. There are a lot of alcoholics out there. Right. And no doubt, I'm sure that could apply to any corporation. And right, we're everywhere. Alcoholism doesn't care what your income is or what your race is or your sexuality. We are impacted everywhere. And so we said, how do we get this out to everyone? How do we make this a conversation? How do we destigmatize both living in recovery and being an alcoholic in recovery, which is what the 4 of us are, and also make it okay to ask for help. And also maybe raise some awareness with allyship on don't just send the box of wine for a wine tasting. Give people an option. Do they want wine or do they want a gift card to Bite Squad?
Right.
Because I think a lot of times assumptions are made, and I know assumptions are made everywhere about this, and it's gotten better since we started, which is great. But just that pause to ask that question, because there are a lot of people who aren't safe getting wine shipped to their house.
Yeah.
And then you add on top of it a pandemic. So.
Yeah, I was just reading an article that somebody had sent me about nine things to be aware of in terms of, as we get back together, in terms of employee get-togethers, right? No more keggers, no more, just to be sensitive to other people within the organization. Oh. Yeah,
it's definitely changing. And Mark Benioff is very clear on his expectations around it and safety around it, which is great. It's been nothing but super supported since we started. So we started on Chatter, and now we've moved it to Slack. Now that we've acquired Slack, or we're acquiring Slack, I should know that.
One of the two. I don't know if it's closed yet, but yeah.
I should know that. I think it's in the process, so you'll have to edit that. So we just put it out there. We made it public. We started sharing our stories. So posting in Chatter, like what our own stories were. And within 6 weeks, we had 300 people join as members,
Wow.
which is incredible.
Now, of those people,
Yeah.
I mean, I presume most of them had maybe never disclosed to anybody at work that they were
Well,
in
not
recovery.
all 300 are sober. So we want
Okay.
allies to join. So we're very clear that like,
Okay.
because a lot of people are also still hold their anonymity close to their vest, which is totally
Right.
fair. And,
Sure.
you know, I have no judgment on that, right? For me, I've always been public about it because it's, in the beginning, it's partly how I kept myself sober, was I would just out myself so that I was accountable. And
Right.
and now it's just who I am, you know? So it's part of my living and leading authentically and vulnerably to my own team is to share that I'm sober and it's a big part of my life. But so the 300 people, I don't know how it breaks down. What I will say is more and more with each day are outing themselves. And a lot of people who are in early recovery, which has been really moving to see people celebrating their day counts, celebrating their months sober, who are doing this in a pandemic and feeling safe enough to do it with their colleagues on SoberForce, which has been really incredible.
Yeah, it has to be very inspiring because
Very inspiring. And
during this
brave.
time it's and brave, and yeah, I mean it does take some courage to do this at a time when the levels of stress and anxiety are heightened,
Yeah.
where we already know that a large fraction of people in sales are feeling extreme levels of stress compounded by the pandemic and don't feel, as we said, feel fair or languishing about their mental health.
Right.
Is to come forward and say, it could be so easy, I think, to say, I'll wait till this is all over.
Right.
Is to do it at a time of heightened anxiety. Is amazing.
And so here's the thing, like had Salesforce not set up the framework for this, it would not have happened. Like I can't imagine. Well, I'll just say this. It was really easy to do this because we have the Office of Equality who has set the framework for equality groups. Salesforce is a trailblazer in these conversations, right?
Right.
In conversations around climate change and on being stewards for the climate, on women's equality and pay equality, on diversity and inclusion, being very vocal, right, with the killings in the last year, right, and Black Lives Matter. So it gave all of us permission. I know it did for me. I can't speak for the other co-founders, but it gave me permission to be courageous in sharing my own story. Because while I had always been public about it in one-to-one conversations, I never posted out onto a platform where 60,000 people could see it. My sobriety and my years that I've been sober and my story, right? And so I was nervous putting that out there, even though I knew that it was necessary for my own authenticity and my own commitment to living a life of service, that I felt very much called that I had to do this. This was necessary to do this. And we said, as we started this out, like, if we help just one person, this is worth it, right? Then we've been successful. And immediately people started pinging us one-to-one, calling us, because we put our cell phones out there, saying, I had a guy call me who I had worked with on a previous account who said, I've got 10 days sober. And I just saw your post, and I thought about calling you before, and I didn't because I didn't really know what your story was. I just knew you didn't drink at that dinner when we were in London, and I noticed it. And he's like, but I just saw your post, and so I knew it was okay to call you. And he is now celebrating, I think, let me think. So if it was 10 days, 4 months sober, and he just asked me to speak at his 12-step meeting. I mean, It's just like, it's just amazing. Like, and those conversations are happening pretty regularly. I mean, at least once a week. I have someone ping me about a child of theirs who's struggling with addiction and what can they do, and a friend. And it is like, feels like the most important work I've ever done. And I love my day job. But this is like truly heart-centered work that I was really asking the universe for a year ago and got presented. And I'm just beyond happy that we're in a place and we're in a company culture where it is not only supported, it's very much encouraged. And we're given the resources we need.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about. So tell us about the structure. So is there a program or multiple programs or
So it's all getting started.
Take us through it. Yeah.
We just got our leadership team, which is like, of course, just people raising their hand and saying, I want to help make this successful. Right. So we have a leadership team that just got elected a month and a half ago. We are partnered closely with the Office of Equality. So we rely on them for all of the structure of just how do you even do elections? How do you run this? How do you, checking in on any legality issues that might be unforeseen, right? They've been super supportive, and they've called out things to us that I didn't even consider, like the comment around people calling us who are in crisis and saying, that we want to make sure you're okay, like that you guys don't get burned out, because that's a lot. And so they're supporting us with the benefits office and employee success team to see what can we do to create more structure around it for people who are in crisis and need help, right? Right. And we're helping to inform and influence that. And so it's all developing, but we'll have a standing monthly call that's open to anyone who wants to join. We're also going to there'll be internal, so we'll have breakout sessions for people to connect. And then we're going to have external quarterly calls. We'll have an external speaker that it's a anonymous call-in, because there's a lot of people who don't want to be associated, who the stigma is real. Stigma is real, and we're very intentionally trying to break that down, but everyone's on their own journey. So we'll have a call that's a call-in that's anonymous that will feature a speaker about their own story or about recovery in some fashion. And then hopefully when events come back, we'll have a event at a Dreamforce, for example, right? Or because the reality is, like, our customers are sober too. And so we want to make sure that we're being very intentional about creating space for those people as well with us at these events. So more to come. It's all brand new, but it's really exciting. And a lot of companies have started reaching out saying, how are you guys doing this? We need to do it.
Yeah, I mean, so for companies, then people are at least sales leaders listening to this. Yeah, how do they get started? I mean, not everybody obviously has the resources of Salesforce, but they don't need to have the resources of Salesforce.
I mean, I think it starts with just honestly leading authentically. I think everyone has a story. Everyone has something. Maybe it's not addiction for you, but like maybe it's depression or anxiety or a good friend of yours or a family member of yours, right? Everyone's got some story. And so I think for me, it's about leading authentically first and foremost and vulnerably and being brave in your vulnerability. I'm a big fan of Brené Brown, as you can probably tell by my language. Yeah. And people relate to that. People connect to that. And so as far as starting a SoberForce at other corporations, I mean, it doesn't have to be a big endeavor. I think anyone who's sober and feels like they would be supported or feel courageous enough to do it, I'd say, to bring that to your benefits team, to your employee success team, to your sales leadership team and say, I want to create a group where this is like we can connect. And it can be as informal as just like having a monthly call where you connect with each other, right? Or use whatever engagement tool you have to connect, whether it's Slack or it's Chatter, like I mentioned, or another solution, like just to create create community, to say you're not alone, because people are really struggling. And a lot of people don't know where to go for help either, right? And so our program isn't associated to a 12-step program. And what's been great for me personally is to see all the paths to recovery that people have and are living that are totally different from what I do. But that could be the perfect path for someone else who's paying attention and wants to start there. So that's been really cool too, to experience.
So are you able to sort of catalog what those are so that people have a resource they can go to, or do they have to contact you?
No. So for me, I'm participating in a 12-step group, so I think that's pretty obvious. Anonymity is a big focus in press, radio, film, which is why I'm not disclosing the actual name of that 12-step group, but you could probably put it together. And because I do not reflect all of that. I am my own story.
Sure.
There are people who've been talking a lot about the book Quit Like a Woman. That's one. There's another book called We Are the Luckiest. And there are calls that have spun out and meetings that have spun out from that. I think, then there's also the people who go towards religion, and that's their path. There's people who do it just for the health benefit, who are like super fit and they don't want the health implications of drinking. So I think there's lots of paths.
So are people, in addition to other, substance issues other than alcohol, also involved with it?
Yes. And I'd say the bulk of us are alcoholics in recovery,
Mm-hmm.
or people contemplating getting sober.
Right.
But there have been people, which was really cool and also equally humbling how willing people were to be brave in their sharing. But on our first call, during the questions and answers, people were asking, like, I'm in recovery from gambling. One guy was like, I'm in recovery from sex addiction. Like, I'm in
Mm-hmm.
recovery from food addiction. Like, is this a place, is this my community too? And we're like, 100% this is your community. Like, this is for all paths of recovery, and it's for all allies. I mean, there's so many people impacted who have family members, husbands, wives, kids, like, who struggle with addiction, and they need community too. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's really just, again, it's like, how do we help each other by sharing our own stories? That destigmatizes it. Maybe it makes
Right.
it so. What my focus in is like, by sharing our stories, do we raise someone's bottom? Do we make it
Right.
easier to ask for help before all is lost? And I hope it's doing that.
Well, yeah, early days. It's exciting to hear about because it's something, obviously it was needed and more companies could do it. I mean, one thing that's a question I'm sort of interested in, maybe you don't have enough data yet, but I talked about that statistic about 75% of people in sales is feeling stressed or highly stressed.
Mm.
Sales is a stressful position, and obviously there's some correlation in some cases for some people that their addiction issues
Yeah.
are stress relief and personal stress management techniques.
Yeah.
And this is a sort of broader question, but how do we help people more in sales and maybe managers? Is how do we
Mm.
create culture that's sort of this less sort of de facto,
Yeah.
macho,
Yeah.
stress oriented culture to something that is more effective and perhaps less overtly
Yeah.
stressful?
It's a great question. I do think that there's probably a reason why, if I think about Salesforce has a big focus on well-being. So there's a Be Well
Mm-hmm.
series that was started that Jody Koner has run, and a lot of focus on the benefits of meditation, and
Mm-hmm.
we get access to Thich Nhat Hanh's, who's one of my personal favorites. Like
And who's that?
weekly email. He teaches mindfulness meditation. So he has a
Okay.
monastery. He's a monk. He's a monastery in France called Plum Village. So there's a big focus on wellness, and there's a lot of resources, whether through our benefits or through our equality groups. There's intentional wellness days. I mean, we're in sales, like, we're very mindful of the burnout and the Zoom burnout, and the fact that people are being super productive because people aren't going on vacation and they're home all day working. Right. And so then we're giving days off. We're like, okay, everyone's off on Friday. Like, and we're making it happen because I think you can't not be aware of that. What we were talking about before we started the call, which is that people are balancing a lot right now.
Yep.
So I think Salesforce and sales leaders at Salesforce holistically do a really good job of acknowledging it. We can't take away the stress of the world.
No.
You know what I mean? But we can acknowledge it. And I think for me personally, like, having leadership acknowledge what's happening in the world and the stress of the last year, especially with all of it, the pandemic, the social upheaval, the election, not to mention then just personal life, right? I shared that my mom passed away last August in the middle of the pandemic from cancer, and it was pretty quick, and it was gruesome. I mean, it's just painful. We're going through that kind of grief, right? But having that be acknowledged, having that be safe to share it, having space to just say, like, this is hard. For me, that alleviates a lot of my own stress, is feeling like I can bring my whole self to work and I can have that be okay, right? And we can acknowledge what's happening. And that's what's really different, I think, in this era compared to before, is like, when I started in my career, these weren't conversations we were having at all.
Well,
like, you did not talk about this stuff. No.
I mean, think about when I started.
No,
this was
feelings. Don't talk about feelings. Leave that at home. What?
Oh yeah, we don't hear anything about it. Yeah, Yep.
So I
just
think it's still a
wasn't.
shift. And I think there's still there's still an adjustment of like, can I really say this at work? I mean, and I felt that way starting SoberForce. Like, are we really going to do this? We're really going to put it out there and like, let everyone know. And then it turns out there's so many people who are like, oh, thank you. I've been looking for this community. I've been sober. I thought I was alone in my sobriety. I didn't know there are all these people sober around me. Like, and the connections made from that. And that just leads, in my opinion, to happier, healthier people, which means happier, healthier employees.
Right.
And probably more committed employees, right?
I would think so, if they're feeling supported. And I think, for me at least, it seems like that one of the huge values, as you just talked about, in terms of something like SoberForce and what could be things that you do in your own company, people are listening, is that, sales is fundamentally a lonely job. Right? I mean, it's your number. Right? I mean, maybe a team number it builds up to, but
no, you're right.
I think I've always
you carry that
believed
number.
that you carry it. It's yours. There's a level of individual stress that perhaps just not found in other jobs, pressure, feeling of responsibility for it. That, as I mentioned before, I think some sales cultures try to amplify that in a way that's unhealthy. But it's if you can find a community, whether
it makes all the difference.
Sobriety, for any other mental health issues.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no reason to be alone.
No, it makes all the difference. For me, like I work way harder when I feel supported and seen. If I don't feel like you see me or value me and who I am, then I am begrudgingly doing the work. But if I feel like I'm supported and seen and heard, and I don't think that's a unique trait, I'd imagine that's a lot of people, then I will give you 10x more, right?
And I think that translates. You take it to the next step, which is, look, if you're not feeling seen or heard and it gets reflected in your work and you're in sales, is, you're really going to do the work with the buyer so they feel seen and heard?
Right.
Chances not. I mean, so... if the customer doesn't feel heard and understood, what are your odds of getting the business? Not very good.
Exactly. Yeah, it's been an awesome journey to be on, and it's brand new, but I'm super excited for other companies to take this and run with it, and I hope they do, and I'm excited to hear about when they do, because we are everywhere. People struggling with addiction or in recovery are everywhere. And you could the reason why I do it is not for the numbers, but I'm sure the numbers will prove out very well, which is you have someone who's not active in their addiction and is actually producing at work. That's a pretty good ROI story. That has nothing to do with our motivation for doing it, but there's the reason I say that is to go, there's no reason a company should not be doing this. It's a win-win all the way around.
Yeah, and I think it's just one of a number of conversations you talked about that companies need to have, and hopefully some have had. Certainly feel very fortunate with Howard Brown, our CEO at Ring DNA. We've had conversations on a lot of these topics in the last year, things that were affecting society at large. Howard's a trained psychologist, so sort of unusual CEO background.
Interesting.
But, yeah. So it makes for a really incredible environment. But other companies can do that.
100%.
So the question I had for you is, so what's sort of been the biggest surprise for you since starting SoberForce?
That's a great question.
What happened that you weren't expecting?
I did not expect people to so quickly feel safe enough to post out their early counts of sobriety. Like, I'm celebrating a month, I'm celebrating 100 days, I'm celebrating 2 months, right? I did not think that would happen because I don't know why. I think because maybe my own fear of the stigma around it still. And so I feel like and probably also because it's been, coming up on 16 years for me. So it's easier, I would think, for me to say it because it's just been part of who I am in my life for so long. But I'm really impressed and inspired by the people who are new to this journey and being brave enough to say it. Because the reality is relapse is a reality for a lot of people in recovery. And so you're outing yourself and, hopefully what comes then out of that is both community so people feel supported at work and outside of work in their sobriety journey, but also a more informed leadership team who can see and help their employees who might be struggling or might struggle at some point in this, right? And like, I think that'll be the next phase of this that I'm aware of, is how do we educate our sales leaders in an intentional way around how to support someone who may be struggling with addiction.
Right.
And it's a super fine line, and I don't always know where that line is, because I'm not intending to be people's sponsor at work. You know, I'm boundaried about that.
Or a therapist for that
Or a therapist, like, no. So what I do is when someone calls me, I share my own experience, strength, and hope with sobriety, and then I point them to resources that have worked for me. And I'm also very intentional to say, this is just my story. There's lots of paths to recovery. Right. Here's how I did it. Here are some places you can go to get connected and to be a resource to them. Like, and I mean it when I say, call me or text me. Because this honestly is like what strengthens my sobriety, is being of service to other people. So anyway, so that's what surprised me, is that there are people who are getting sober in this pandemic and outing it on our Slack channel, which is and being met with this overwhelming support, which that part I didn't doubt. That part I would have expected. But it's really cool to see.
Right. And I think you are starting to allude to it, as, you know, the other side of it is that when you do come out, is you're suddenly accountable too, right? I mean, you've told people, look, this is so that is a form of support, I think, is knowing there's other people that are helping to hold you accountable.
But how much cooler is it that, like, now that our benefits team's engaged on it, and not that they weren't before, they obviously had a process for someone who reached out for support, but that we can get really intentional about it around what does it look like when someone calls and needs rehab? What does it look like when someone needs detox? Like, where do we point a family member who's looking for an interventionist and who's covered by our benefits, right? I mean, those types of conversations that we can have and help support and then get the word out about that to the community, so that maybe your bottom isn't getting fired because you didn't perform in your job, but maybe it's going and getting help and coming back and being a productive employee. And one of our co-founders has that story of getting sober while at Salesforce, and quite a few, well, obviously now with this, people who are sharing their day count, but like, it's been really cool to hear stories of people saying, like, I am so committed to Salesforce because I got sober while here and I was fully supported. I got the treatment I needed. I came back. I was supported in my coming back. Like, and to just have the chance to build upon that and what is already, you know, an established culture, but like to build upon that support.
Right.
Because I think, unfortunately, a lot of alcoholics just get fired in just generally speaking in the world.
Yeah. Well, I think extends to alcoholics. You know, people are depressed, with anxiety, that are, you know, aren't able to function. I do believe that we spend all this time now talking in sales about, you know, we have to help our frontline managers become better coaches, or all of our line of managers be better coaches. And we sort of ill-equip them to do that. We sort of say, go do it, without giving a lot of the investment for the vast majority of companies. But equally as important, it's like we should be training managers to start to recognize some of the signs, you know, of people that are struggling.
Yeah.
And again, it's not
don't
to be
assume
a
that
therapist.
people just know what to do.
Right. It's not to be a therapist, but this is a person that you're helping on a very personal path. You should be working this person to become the best version of themselves. That's part of your job as a manager. And that means looking at it a little more holistically than just what they do in the 8 hours a day or whatever that they're working. Yeah. And so, I would hope, and this is something I advocate for, is we train.
And give people the chance, right? So if someone says, like, I'm going to choose to not get help or not treat my alcoholism, well, then there are probably consequences at some point for that, right? But like, to just have the chance to get them help and get them connected. Yes. Is a change. That would be a massive change. Yeah. And again, I think Salesforce has done a really good job of it. So I'm not speaking specifically to Salesforce. I just think, generally speaking, in our society, if we could just do a better job maybe of seeing people and saying, I see you and I care for you and it looks like you're struggling and how can I help you? How much happier would we be and healthier as a group of people?
Oh yeah. And I think in sales in general too, it's how do I say this nicely? Is that, there's this myth that somehow back, Zora and I was coming of age in sales, back in the previous century that, things were very formal and rough and tumble and very macho. And it's like, it really hasn't changed much. And perhaps hasn't changed at all in a lot of those respects, because there's a sort of expectation of being.
I think it's changing,
hard.
but maybe that's just because I'm in leadership and I'm not that.
Well, I'm talking about there are certainly companies like LinkedIn or Salesforce that, absolutely, appear to be much more enlightened than others. But the horror stories after horror stories, and certainly in
we have a long ways to
go.
go. I'd say in general, in just a society, just look around at what's going on in our world, right? We have a long ways to go. For sure.
But you're doing well. You're doing good for people, which is great. And I'm really inspired by what you all are doing with SoberForce, and hopefully it serves as an example for other companies.
I hope so. It's been really meaningful work, and I'm very grateful to be doing it.
Excellent. Well, if people want to connect with you and learn more about what you're doing with SoberForce or whatever, however they'd like to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, LinkedIn. So just find me there, Marin Nelson, and you'll find me.
I think you may be the only one.
Yeah, you'll find me. I'm sure there's another Marin Nelson, but I'm the only one at Salesforce.
All right. Marin, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your story with us, and letting people know what the good work you guys are doing with SoberForce. Appreciate it.
Well, Andy, thank you to you for having these conversations. It really matters. So I appreciate you making space for me to share the story of SoberForce.
Well, thank you. Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. We're so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guest, Marin Nelson, for sharing her story with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you could also leave us a rating or a review and let us know how we're doing, we'd appreciate it. You can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this episode is over. So thank you for your help, and thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.